Hello everyone, and welcome to the 9th tutorial in the C Programming with Windows API series. In the previous tutorial, we talked about functions, how to use them, how to define them, where they're used and why they're needed, as well as structures, how to use a structure, how to define a structure, what the benefit is of using a structure across huge applications, and how to use a structure from within a function. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about namespaces. So I'm going to go ahead here and open up the Visual Studio IDE. And right here I have the simple template open up, just like we had from the previous tutorial. But I have the overview for this tutorial in a multi-line comment written right here. So the first thing I'm going to do for you guys is explain to you what a namespace is. So a namespace is basically like a containment, or picture it like a function of functions, like let me write that down because that might have sounded weird. A function of functions. So you can picture it as kind of like that, except it's a container of functions. So a container of functions. So basically, you can write as many functions, variables, or structures, basically anything. You can write anything within this container called the namespace, and you can use it throughout your whole application at any given time. And why is this efficient? Is because it allows you to organize specific units of information given to a specific name or naming convention throughout your application. So if you have tons of functions scattered all over the place and you want to somehow organize all the functions together, kind of like piece them together and show like your audience what each function means, or like what kind of category it's part of. Like for example, we have a function called bake cake, or like a function called cook omelet, right? And we want to like put both these functions from within one container called like how to cook or something. We can do that just by naming the convention or the namespace how to cook, and then referencing these functions as part of that namespace. So I'm going to show you guys two things. First of all, I'm going to show you guys how to write a function from within the namespace and then use it at any part in your application. And then I'm going to show you guys how to use or define a namespace and actually write that function from that namespace outside of the actual namespace itself. So let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to open up tools.h, and the first thing that I'm going to do is something pretty cool. I'm going to take tools.h, click it over here in the top left where my cursor is, click it and hold, and then drag it outside of the current window, and then I'm going to place it on the side of this window right here. Now I can view both tools.h and tutorial9.cpp at the same time, and I can kind of work with both of them at the same time. And I'll explain why this is useful in a second. But okay, let's imagine that we have a whole ton of definitions here, like hundreds and hundreds of definitions, right? In this tutorial tools.h file, and this is like our global header file. Let's assume just for this reason. I want to use this tools.h header file throughout my whole application, but I also want to use different functions from it, and I have a bunch of functionalities in here, but I don't exactly remember them. I can use this this window right here for reference while I'm writing the current CPP file and look back on it back and forth without having to like move through these tabs here at the top simultaneously. I can just have them all right in front of me. So let's define a namespace right here inside tools.h. Let's call this namespace with the syntax namespace. Let's call it tutorials, okay? Or actually, let's call it tutorial 9 because this is tutorial 9. Inside this namespace, let's define a variable int a, okay? So integer a, and let's define a function as a void data type. Remember, void doesn't return anything; it specifically does what it's made to do. And let's call this void function init with no parameters. And then let's open up the curly braces of this function and actually write this function from within this namespace, tutorial 9. All this function is going to do is set the value of a equal to 5, okay? A equal to 5. So that's all it does. And take note that it doesn't need to, because it's in the same namespace, because it's in the same container, every function that we define in here doesn't need to actually include the variable name that we're using inside, like for example, the parameter But it can. However, it can, of course, include the same variable name inside the parameter because this is considered a local parameter, or rather a local variable, but int a is considered to be like a global variable. So it can, and it also doesn't have to. So it's optional. So as long as the variable that I'm using is inside the namespace, inside the same file, I can use it regardless in any function that I write inside of this namespace. And that's kind of another reason why namespaces are very convenient, because you can control a whole set of variables from one specific naming convention or one category or one namespace, regardless of which function it's in, as long as that function is within that namespace. So all this function is going to do is set int init a equal to 5. Okay? So let's assume that I want to call init, this init function, from tutorial 9 namespace inside main. Notice how main isn't actually part of namespace tutorial 9, so I can't actually call init just right here because it'll say that init is undefined. How I have to access a variable or like a function from a namespace is I have to type tutorial 9, so the name of the namespace, followed by 2 colons, and these 2 colons separate like the category of tutorial 9 from like the actual function name or variable that I'm trying to access. So I can even do like tutorial 9a, right? I can access it like that. But that's how you access a function or a data type or variable from a namespace. Another convenient way that you can do this is simply by typing using namespace tutorial 9. Okay. So then, just by doing that, it already sees that, oh, okay, so void init, as right here, as you see, is inside tutorial 9. And by doing this, I don't have to actually type the namespace every time when I'm trying to access a variable. However, note that if you have this right here, you can't actually rename variable names with the same variable name that you used inside the namespace. So what I mean by this is, for example, let's assume I don't have this right here, okay? And I define a variable int a equal to 5, right? So, and then I try to access tutorial 9a, okay, and I set this equal to 7. Notice how right now I can have 2 variables of the same name inside one file, and here I'm talking about 2 separate variables. So if I do something like printf d, or rather 1 and n2 n, and then d, and then a tutorial, oops, spelled that wrong, tutorial 9a. So if I print f these 2 values here, these are going to actually have separate values. As you can see here, let me just close this diagnostics tools and open it up here. As you can see, 1 has a 5 beside of it, where I'm printing this a, and 2, the number 2 here, has a 7 beside of it, which I'm printing this a, the one from tutorial namespace. So if you want to have variables with the same name, but you want to be referencing 2 different variables, then you can actually put one of the variables inside a namespace, or have another one of the variables inside another namespace, or have another one of the variables just inside the function itself. And as long as you reference the namespace itself or the variable itself before outputting it, you can actually tell the interpreter or compiler that you're specifically talking about that variable. So as you can see, we have 2 different variables, they're the same data type, same name, but they're different variables that have 2 separate values inside them. And that's how you can actually access any kind of function from within the namespace, or any kind of data type. So let's say I do something like this now. I actually do using namespace tutorial 9, and then I define int a equal to 5, right? And then I say a equals to 7. Right here, it doesn't actually know which a I'm talking about, because using namespace tutorial 9 basically means that all it does is it kind of includes just the namespace itself without the borders inside the current file from this file here. It includes everything that's inside this namespace without the namespace itself. So it's assuming that A is now like a global variable. So when I want, like, let's say I want to reference specifically this A right here, but I already defined another A here, set it equal to 5. Now it doesn't know which A I'm talking about. So if you want to specifically, even if you're using namespace tutorial 9, and you have the same variable here, and you want to specifically talk about that variable, you can still do tutorial 9 : and then it'll know that you're talking about that variable specifically, not like this one right here that you just initialized. So that's an important thing to take note if you're going to be using the namespace and then the name of the namespace in your thing without actually having to write tutorial 9 before it. Okay, so let's move on. Let's assume that I want to use this namespace inside of another file. Let's say I have another file. I make a new item and call it like run.cpp. Okay? And I move Control X this main to here, and then I simply do include stdio.h and then include tools.h because I want to use that namespace, as well as this wait function, which is defined right here. What I can do now is, let's say I want to access, let's say I want to access A. Okay, from this namespace. Okay, so let's say I do, or better yet, let's do it this way. Let's assume another way. I was mentioning before, another way that you can define the function without actually writing it inside the actual namespace is you can write the function outside of the namespace. Okay, and then set A equal to 5, and even though A isn't defined anywhere in this application, if you put the tutorial 9 : before the function name, it'll know that you're talking specifically about this A here. And now you can actually manipulate this variable here from the actual namespace itself by calling it from wherever you want in the application. But let's say I have, since I initialized this A here, let's assume that I want to printf the tutorial 9a right here, like right here. Okay, so let's assume I do init, or rather tutorial 9 init, and I call it right here. Okay, and then I do printf d and tutorial 9a. Okay, I'm going to stop this application and run it again. Now notice when I run it, it gives me these build errors. It says, whatever, would you like to run the previous successful build? Okay, no, I don't. Oh, sorry, I forgot to write this. So the reason it gave me the build errors before was because I actually forgot to put a semicolon right here. Silly me. But the window that I was looking to get is this one right here. So it says, build errors, would you like to run it the last successful build? And the reason, so here at the bottom you see it says error linker. So linker, remember, is pre-compile time. It says int tutorial 9 : a, which I'm trying to call right here, has already been defined in run.object. But hold on, what do you mean it's already been defined? Run.object is the object file, which is basically a file that's generated by the interpreter before it gets passed to the compiler, of all the different function types and variables that are being used inside of the current file that we're talking about. So in this case, it's talking about run.object, which is run.cpp object file, and it says it's already been defined. Now hold on there, what do you mean by it's already been defined? Where have I defined A already? Well, basically what it's saying is, let me just press insert there. It's saying that you can't use int A explicitly inside one file where you've already actually included it in another file. Now this is where it gets a little bit confusing. What it's saying is that because I already included A here inside the tools.h file, and I'm assigning A here inside the tutorial9.cpp file, I can't call it inside run.cpp. unless there is a way you can get around this. Now, the way you can get around this is by defining a in a manner like such. You can type this syntax keyword extern before the variable a, and what this means is it says that this specific data type, this specific variable a, can not only be used inside this one file, it can also be used in any other file where you actually want to call it. So basically, this a is set like it's not only set now as a global variable for this namespace, but it's set as a global variable for any given file that we have in this 9 project. So if I create another file and try to access a, it'll also be set for that file too. So it's like a global variable by typing extern. But another important thing that you have to do before we run this application is we have to define the integer variable a where we are initializing the variable. So what I mean by this is I have to define int a tutorial 9 : a as like a global variable within this function, within this file. Before I can actually use it in another file. But take note, it only has to be it specifically has to be initialized in the file where you're first initializing the variable. So if I make another file like, let's say, etc. or whatever .cpp, and I try to change the value of a again, I can do that because I've already initialized it in the initial file where it first gets initialized. And the interpreter only needs the file to be initialized, it only needs the variable to be initialized once throughout the first execution of that specific variable. So now if I run the application, you can see that I get no errors in the debugger, and the number 5, which I've assigned a to right here, is outputted in my command prompt right here. And I'm going to hit enter. So as you can see, that basically wraps up everything I wanted to talk about with namespaces. They're convenient as they're used as containers for a set of data types or functions which you can use throughout your whole application or at any given point in your application. As you can see, you can use them to define global variables across many different files within your project, or you can just use it as a set or a naming convention as a category to specifically set a set of functions within one category or many categories if you have more than one namespace, as you can easily define as many namespaces as you wish. So as I said, that basically wraps up everything for this tutorial. And if you guys learned something new, or if you guys just liked the video, give me a thumbs up. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. And I guess I'll be seeing you guys in the next tutorial. Stay tuned. Bye.